Hi, everyone. I'm so glad you're here. And I'm so glad to get to speak to shelters because not only do I help you maintain a great relationship with your adoptees and make sure the dogs stay where they are if that's the right course for them, but I also help everyone have conversations they need to have because that's my work. I don't litigate anymore. I simply help people resolve conflicts over animals or resolve conflicts between people who are passionate about animals. So without further ado, let's start because I know I have to get through this and I want to make sure I get through it with plenty of time for questions. So I want to appreciate the fact that all of you who work in a shelter want to place each and every dog with a great owner. You want to help those owners to train and care for their new pets, make sure that placement works out. Each pet has the opportunity to become a great companion. And for me, that is the single most important piece. Now I have found that a lot of the shelters that I work with are worried about the post-COVID shelter clearing that will then create maybe shelter drop-offs. So it really is something that you need to be aware of. How do you mentor people? How do you enable them to take care of themselves and their pets if in fact something happens to them, either because of COVID, because of going back to work, because of anything that could come up that would interrupt this period where we're all home with our pets, right? Everybody, almost everybody's home with their pets. People have gotten pets because they're home. So the fear that the pets will be dropped off at a shelter, or the fear, which has become a reality recently because of COVID, of pets being left home and then ending up in a shelter because no one made a plan, is why I'm here today to talk to all of you. Because you're either going to get the dog now or get the dog later if people don't make plans for their pets. So when a shelter is involved, I always love to have them give their adoptees, the people who adopt the dog, not the dog, the opportunity to make a plan to both take care of the pet long-term, short-term, and take care of the rescue long-term, short-term, or the shelter long-term, short-term, because it's important that people give back. That's my whole motto. I want to make sure that the animals are well placed. I want to make sure they're well cared for. I want to make sure they go back where they belong if they need to, or that if in fact there's some funding that's created for pets, that if there's a residual, it goes back to the shelter or rescue from which the pet was obtained. So how many of you have ever asked your adopters if they have a pet plan in their will? Probably none, because that's not something that's on the checklist, but it is something that's really important for you. How many have written a pet trust? There is a difference. There's a big difference. And if in fact they've set aside money for the pets if they're returned, or for a rescue to rehome, or the shelter to rehome. Sorry about that. Hold on. I just want to make sure that you understand that most adopters don't think about the next step. I know that most of you, and I think I have a slide in the future about this, have contracts that require the pets to be returned to the shelter or the rescue. That's fine. However, there's a way you can work together so that the pets end up in the best place for them. Most people who have pet care plans put them in their wills. What they don't realize is they need to die before those plans come to fruition. And if in fact you have a client who signs a contract with you regarding the care of their pets, that contract might not be available to people taking care of that person if they're sick, or after the person has passed away. There's nobody really obligated to give the dog back to you. So you really want to create that mentorship and that collaboration that allows you to know where these pets are, know where they're going to go, and possibly be a recipient of a residual amount of money that might be in a pet trust or in a will, because you've worked so closely with your adoptees to make sure that they are providing for the pet and keeping you in the loop. So why and what do you mean, Deborah? Why do we have to talk about wills? I only want to talk about the adoption contract and to make sure the dog is in a good place. And, what is this all about? Given the relationship you have with the shelters, with the adoptees, you want to be a part of the plans they make for this pet. As I said, you likely have an adoption contract that requires the pet to be returned if they can't keep it, which is great, except some people don't necessarily do it, and you are very busy, so you can't call and check up on everyone all the time. And litigation doesn't really fit the bill, because yes, you'll get the dog back, but then you'll probably destroy the relationship, which many of you might think that's a good idea. I'll destroy the relationship because these people didn't give the dog back like they were supposed to. However, there is a way, and I've been doing it for 10 years, to have this conversation, to appreciate people not even probably reading that portion of the contract. So they didn't intentionally violate it. However, they didn't keep you in the loop. This plan that I work with pet owners and shelters and rescues, that secures the next step for the pets that they've adopted from a shelter, whether the adopter is alive or dead, because you want to make sure you know where that dog goes. You really do. I know you do. Would it be helpful to fund the return and the next placement? Yes, it would. I give the example of the North Shore Animal League because the North Shore Animal League is one of the groups that has provided in their adoption information the ability to make a plan that returns the dog to the shelter if you can no longer take it, or if something happens to you. And the dog will either live its life at the North Shore Animal League or be readopted. It costs, at the time I checked on this, it cost $5,000. You can look it up. It might cost more now. But they also have them at Texas A&M. These are places where people can place their pets in the event they don't have anyone to care for them. However, you really do know that there are people who can care for these pets, and I'm going to talk about that now. Statistically, people who pass away or who get sick don't have any plan for their pets. They don't expect to pass away. They expect to outlive their pets, especially 30, 40, and 50-year-olds. I know that all of us over the last 8 months that we've been living through COVID, understand that pets have been left behind. I know some of you in the shelters have received those pets, and those pets have been so frightened. First of all, they were picked up by somebody who wasn't just in their regular street clothes, but in a hazmat suit, because likely the person who left them behind is in the hospital with COVID. So you have a traumatized pet coming to a shelter. You guys are doing phenomenal work. However, the person who's in the hospital doesn't even know their pets have been taken. And sometimes the time limits run out. So the animal care and control shelter have the pets. There's no communication. There's only a certain amount of time that the dogs and cats will be held. And what happens next? If you had a plan in place, if you worked with your adoptees to make sure if something like this happens, I know we've never had something like this happen before. However, if you work with your adoptees on making a plan, it will give you peace of mind that you know the dogs will come back, the cats will come back, or if there is someone in place who can take care of these animals, it would be phenomenal. That way, the fear that we all are waiting, anticipating, and I hope never happens, is that the dogs and cats will be returned because people will return to work, or they've been out of work so long they can't afford to keep their pets. So these are really relevant, tangible fears that we have. But if when we talk to our adoptees, we make sure they put a plan in place, this will eliminate that, because not only will it either return the dog to the shelter or rescue, it will give the shelter or rescue the opportunity to find people to place the dog with that know the dog, that are willing to take the dog. So I discovered all of these plans because I actually broke my ankle and didn't have a plan for my pets. And so I'm sharing this plan with shelters because I know that shelters have as much of an interest in where the pets go if someone gets injured or someone dies as the owner does, especially if they've been adopted from a shelter, or they're going to end up in the shelter because the family can't take care of it. So if you have a plan, that will help the shelters minimize the amount of animals coming in because you have a plan, or enables the shelter to keep in touch with the pets that have been placed. After my accident, I realized I had no plan for my pets. I had 9 dogs, so you can imagine how crazy it was at my house. I decided to build something that would fix that so that we could all pre-plan for the care of pets. If something happened to me or if something happened to any of your adoptees, that's why I created the MAAP Blueprint. As a shelter, you're always there to take the pets back. You're always there. It's in your contract. As I said, I have this slide in here because I know all of you have the ability to take the pets back. What happens if someone gets sick or injured? What if their situation changes? How do you manage what is best for everyone, including the pet? This takes just a little bit of ingenuity and time to figure out what it is that will be best for the shelter, best for the pet, in a conversation with the adoptee. Because if you want to make sure these pets stay adopted, stay in their homes, helping that adoptee find ways to keep the pet in the home while they're injured, or possibly find a new person to take the dogs in the event they're sick. I have to tell you that when COVID hit, I know we all were and still are reeling from everything we've experienced during COVID. It seemed to me that the plan I always talked about and the program I have for the Blueprint always said, you know, just get 3 people to help you with your pets, no problems. Well, I realized post COVID that the 3 people have to almost live next door to you, because if your state is closed, people really are reluctant to drive into a different state and then have to quarantine on their way out. So we've adjusted all of our understanding to making sure we have people who are in our sphere, our close sphere, to take care of those animals. Now, I might adopt a dog from a shelter in New Jersey or Connecticut. I live in New York. But that would be difficult to assimilate in COVID because of everything that's happening. So if you work with your adoptees to find the best way to assure the pet stays in a good home, has the care it needs, returns to the shelter if necessary, or if there is a perfect person to adopt the pet, that would be something the shelter would work with the owner. My apologies. I don't know why it's doing that, but it is. Work with the adopter or adoptee to make sure that we are having that dog find or cat find a best place. So what I want you to think about when you're talking to your adopters is that there are 7 Ds you have to worry about. Death is only one. And death is pretty final. And if the dog comes back due to the contract, that's great. But if you don't know about it, it's not coming back. So I always say to people, make sure you talk to your adopters about how are we going to navigate this going forward. So there's divorce. People get divorced and fight over the pets. My office is full of it. There's delay. So you're delayed, and who's going to take care of the pet? I only had animal care for such and such a time. How do I do that? And now with everyone being delayed, it's difficult. You have a disability, broken arm, broken legs, something sick. There's a disaster. How do you plan for a disaster? So you've adopted this dog. How do we help you plan for a disaster, a hurricane, a fire, a tornado? How do we help you plan for this? If you have a disease, pets, you know, we've all known now, none of us thankfully have the disease of COVID. We're home with our pets. But if you do have a disease, if you have a cancer, having the pet home with you is key. But how do you maintain the care of the pet while you're navigating caring for yourself? And of course, the final one is dementia, which all of us know people who've had pets who have dementia. And how do we make a plan for them to either see the pet to ground them, keep the pet possibly if that's even in the cards, so that the pet is not left and not cared for because of what's happened to the owner. Now, I want you to know, except for death, all of these other things happen that do not fall under the plans in your will, which is why I do the MAAP plan, so that people can actually make a plan. Most of us hope or want or believe that adoptees will keep the dogs no matter what. A family neighbor will take it, a family member will take it, somebody will care for the pet. Someone who knows the dog will adopt the dog. Now, as I said, I recognize contracts say that can't happen, but when I have dogs, have puppies, and I sell them, I always have the first right of refusal, as do you. And so you want to make sure that coming back to you is the best for the dog, and having that conversation with your adopter is so important. Who is actually in the best position to adopt that dog? It is something that requires a conversation. It requires a review of the person who's next in line, who the pet owner has taken the time to identify to help you not have the dog necessarily return to the shelter, but still maintain connection with the dog. There are 4 reasons you want to introduce this concept and work with the adopters to make a plan. The pets do not need to be returned to the shelter. I know you want them to be, and absolutely I want you in the loop. Don't think that any of this is trying to circumvent the shelter from keeping track of the pet. That's what you do. However, keeping the shelter in the loop is key. And it also helps because it provides funding possibilities for the shelter in the will. When I help people make these MAAP plans for adopted pets, I say to them, so who would you have to return the dog to in the contract that you signed? And they say, well, to the shelter. I said, well, if you get up, because I talk about this to your adopters too, so it's not just you guys, I talk to them, to the adopters as well. Why don't you sit down and talk to the shelter and say, listen, I'm making my MAAP plan. I'm putting aside $5,000 for the care of my pet if something happens to me. I have these 3 people as my adopter, as my, stand-ins. I'd like you to know who they are. I'd like you to know how to get in touch with them, and let's have a conversation. And I don't know about you, but I would really like to make sure that if a dog is already aware of the other person, likes the other person, that person has been in their life for years, you want to really retain that connectivity, but you want to do it in a way that keeps you in the loop. So that's why this MAAP plan works so well, because it fosters that conversation that you need to have that nobody wants to have. I know. If the pet is returned, the pet has funding to care for it, which is great. That's what the North Shore Animal League does. But if the money is put into a trust and it's an irrevocable trust for reasons that are so broad, I won't even get into it, but it has to be irrevocable if you're over 65. Otherwise, it can be clawed back into the person's estate. Then that money could be left to you. So this is a win-win for the shelter if you take the time to explain to your adopters why, in fact, you want to make sure they make a plan for their pet. So this is a story that I had when I first started this. Fluffy was a dog that an older woman had who was dying, unfortunately. She left $5,000 to whoever took care of Fluffy. She had 3 children. Those 3 children dropped the cat off at a high kill shelter. And they went back to their attorney, who asked for a certificate that the pet had actually been euthanized. It hadn't been, it was adopted. And so Mr. and Mrs. Smith got the $5,000. Don't rely on your family to do what you think they're going to do. Don't rely on anyone. You really need to make this plan so that the pet has a place to go, either back to the shelter or to family members who really want them. So this plan that I hope you all will share with your adopters so that they can make a plan that keeps you in the loop. It's a plan for dogs and cats and birds and reptiles and horses. Nobody makes plans for any of their animals. Nothing's ever going to happen to them before their animal passes away. And you as shelter owners know that is one of the 3 great lies in the world, especially for horses. And you know how easy it is to shelter a horse, not. So you really need to just ask them to make this plan in coordination and collaboration with you. The MAAP plan is a 4-part plan, which makes it easy for you to have a conversation with your adopters about how to do it. You want them to make a plan. So what would happen if something happened to you short-term, long-term? Appoint caregivers. Let us know who is in the dog's life, the cat's life, the bird's life, that would make a perfect person to work with us to rehome the dog with them, but we have to be in the loop because shelters really do want to maintain that connectivity. And I respect that and I want to appreciate that. The other thing that's really helpful, and sometimes shelters get this information, but especially during COVID, when pets were taken out of apartments here in New York and dropped off in animal care and control and beyond, there was no dossier that came with the dogs or cats. You didn't know what shots they had. You didn't know what their temperament was. You didn't know if they got along well with other dogs or cats. So having the owner, you give that to the owner as best you can for the time you've spent with the dog in the shelter. What's each pet like? What do they need? What do they thrive on? Well, once they're with the adopter, having them write up what they've done really helps the next person understand the pet's needs and the pet's care. And then the final piece, which is key, they need to publish their plan that they've made with their family, the shelter, the caregivers, their attorney, and their veterinarian. And you might want to know, like, why is that important? Well, I have found that when people make a plan, and it has to be a realistic plan, it can't be a crazy plan. We have to reality test it. And that's what I do, because some people say, I want the dog to be in an only dog home. I had someone who wanted her 5 cats to stay together and no other cat could be in the house. And I was like, wow, that's pretty specific. And somebody should have sat down and had a conversation with her on why that might not necessarily be advantageous to the cats. So the plan has to be really realistic. But publishing your plan is key, because everybody needs to know you have a plan. You want the shelter to know there's a plan in place so they know who the people are who are the caregivers. You want the caregivers to know who everybody is, including the shelter, because there's that communication piece. You want your attorney to know, because they're the ones who are going to pay the bills or drop off the money that you've left for the care of the pets. And finally, you want your veterinarian to know, because if in fact someone who has either short-term or long-term care of your pet, of the shelter pet, they need to know that this person has the right to bring this dog or cat to the veterinarian, and it has to be in their file. Of course, without saying, the family has to know what your plan is. But between the family and the shelter, especially with shelter adopted pets, you really need to know what the plan is. Helping adopters make a MAAP plan helps you, the adopter, and future adopters. It helps because it sets up directives. It sets up how you do things. Caregivers are pre-approved. You're in the loop. You know that after Mary Smith, if something happens to Mary Smith, she has her neighbor, Judy Jones, and her other neighbor, Mary Smith's sister, June, or whatever. You know who the caregivers are, and they're pre-approved. They're already on the list. You know who they are. Pets can change. And if in fact you make a MAAP plan and they come to get another dog at the shelter, you can always just update that MAAP plan and give them all the current directives and pets, and you don't have to rewrite your will or rewrite your trust. If the MAAP changes, which is the plan you make for your pets, your relationship with the shelter and the adopter does not change, because it's written in there. It's such an important piece of information. I know shelters really struggle with people keeping in touch, struggle with people letting them know if they need help, or struggle with people dropping them off because it got tough. Most of the time, if you have these conversations and you ask them to really take a good look at what it is they want to do with their pets, they really do make the choice to help you help them either keep the pet or return the pet with all the information and possibly funding to keep the pet in the shelter. It's something that's a win-win for everyone. The template that I just said, the MAAP, helps you and the adopters find caregivers. It gives you that little piece of information that, okay, so what do I have to do to make a plan? Well, you need to make that plan, address the needs of the pet, appoint caregivers, and publish it. As I said, it helps shelters and veterinarians stay fully informed about where the pet is and who's taking care of the pet. Because caregivers are fully identified, on board, and redundant for ease of next steps, this pet has a plan. It includes the shelter, because I know that's important to all of you. And as I said, the transfer will be fully funded. It's interesting to understand and to recognize that people don't really, and shelters don't necessarily understand that having this redundancy of care will help them not have repeat drop-offs, because there is a way to make sure that the pets remain in the house. They know what they have to do. You've mentored them, you've helped them. And maybe there's someone who's met the dog in the area who really loves the dog, and you get the opportunity to really help them help the dog if the dog doesn't work out with the original adopters. Example of why you want to make one of these plans. One of the most overlooked things that happen is traveling with your pets. So you're either traveling with your pets or you're not traveling with your pets. And most times no one knows what to do in the event you have a car accident, you're hurt, you're taken to the emergency room. If your dog is in the car, he's going to animal care and control. If you have this plan and these numbers, then animal care and control knows who to call. They need know to call the shelter. They need know to call everywhere that the dog or the cat can go so that they don't necessarily are long-term people in the shelter. Also, if you're involved in an accident and the pet isn't in the car, they know you have a pet at home. If you are ill for longer than the legislated period, it really makes an issue, as I said at the beginning, because there's only so much time a dog or cat can stay in a shelter. Then they're given to a rescue, either a non-breed specific rescue or a breed specific rescue that do great work. However, then the dog can be adopted. And especially now during COVID, so many times this has happened. And when the person recovers 3 or 4 months later, because they didn't answer their phone, the dog or cat are adopted and they can't get it back. So you really want to make sure that whoever adopts your pets knows how to make a plan so that the pet stays with them if that's what they want, or has a great and safe landing pattern. How do you join? I have a 30-minute call that's free. It's free every Wednesday night talking about how to care for your pet. It talks like this about why it is you want to do this. And hopefully everyone takes away the tidbits and writes their own program and does what they want. They can either work with me or they can not work with me. It's fine. It's an international community. We have people from all over the world. We exchange ideas, and I can tell you that so many people have come up with ideas for both shelter pets and just owned pets that someone has purchased on how to make sure people are in the loop and caring for these animals long-term, short-term. I know that CC will publish this recording, so you'll be able to get this link, but it is always bit.ly MAAP and then the date. So next one is December 9th, so it's DEC 9. Every Wednesday it'll roll over, so if you want to join us, please do. These are all the links that I've put in for pet trusts. So why am I here doing this? Well, I am so appreciative of CC for letting me have a conversation with shelters on how to help people keep their pets. I'm a reform litigator who was a PTA mom, and then I drank the Kool-Aid of mediation. So I wrote a book on mediation of conflicts between people over animals, which is called Nipped in the Bud, Not in the Butt. And I speak all over the world. I am grateful that all of you are here. I know I'm coming to the end of my time. This is my contact information. Look at it quick. I also have a podcast, Why Do Pets Matter, which talks about all sorts of things that impact shelters as well as pet owners. So please join us. It's fun.